Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Medilink Midlands. Today we're going to find out more about the different routes to funding in the healthcare sector. Now, before I pass on to our presenter, I wanted to remind everyone that today's sessions will be recorded and shared online later on today. Today's session will include a 40-minute presentation followed by a Q&A session at the end. Please use the chat function to submit your questions. Before we begin, I also wanted to thank Hexagon, who are sponsoring today's webinar. They are a global leader in digital reality solutions and make manufacturing smarter. So to find out more about what they do, visit their website, hexagonmi.com. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Teresa, who will lead today's presentation.
Good morning. Brilliant. I was going to say, it might be worth having the first slide up. Okay, good morning. Welcome to this Routes to Funding webinar. I'm joined today by my colleagues Caroline Sykes from Medilink Midlands as well, and also Esther from TBAT Innovation, an experienced business development manager. Thank you to Silverstone for hosting, and also to my co-presenters. I'm sure you're going to get lots of useful information today, and I hope you find the topic really useful. The slides are available at the end, so if you'd like any more information, also please contact. I think we've got contacts on those slides. Next slide, please. Oh, I hate this one. Yeah, this is a little bit about me, so you know I do actually know what I'm talking about, although they obviously don't know everything. That's why we have such excellent extra speakers on today to make sure that they cover all the very important stuff to do with all the funding sides. I'm an innovation advisor with Medilink Midlands. And next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. Medilink Midlands is a membership organisation that delivers bespoke directly business support across the whole of the Midlands region. Basically, we concentrate on life sciences, MedTech, health and wellbeing, all the areas surrounding, medical innovation and support. Originally, we were based in East Midlands, but we've joined with West Midlands, and also we've added on, as you can see from the map, quite a considerable additional area that we cover in depth. But we don't just work with companies in the Midlands. We're happy to work with companies of all sizes across the whole of the UK and also abroad. And we do actually have some good contacts across all of that diaspora and overseas as well. So very worth a conversation with us if you have any interest or anything at all where you think, could this be MedTech? Do we need to talk to somebody about this? Come and have a chat with us about all the cross-boundary support and activity we give. Next slide, please. And here we have just a brief summary of some of the things that we do that are specific and bespoke. So obviously funding and grant management, which is what we're looking at today. We do have access to the NHS through the academic health science networks, and also through the hospitals where we have our own contacts into their innovation and research. We've got a very skilled advisory team, so it's not just about the business support. There's lots of other things that we can do as well. Lots of collaborations that we're involved with. We have access to lots of different people, and like lots of organisations, we do sector-specific events and networking as well. So please do look at our website and see if there is anything else at the moment, particularly on the webinar side, that might be useful to you to help you look at whether you want to transfer or transition into the medtech industry if you're not already there. Next slide, please. And now we move on to the area that I suspect most people are really interested about. Medilink Midlands still has some grant funding. We still have that grant funding through till June 2023. And you can see there, it looks like quite a large amount of money, which it is. It's up to 20,000 on a £50,000 project spend, and all the way down to a much smaller amount. So if you just want a couple of thousand of grant support on a £5,000 project, then you can come and talk to us. But it is about looking at areas that are in medtech and health and wellbeing. So if we could look at the next slide, there are some caveats with that. Oh, we'll talk about the travel grant funding first. So we've got innovation grant funding, but we've also got some support for conferences. Now, this one is actually, I think, of a lot of interest to Silverstone members, because there are a lot of conferences out there which will have a health stream or a medtech stream. it may be an area that you are exhibiting in for your own products, but if that conference also is looking at that transition side into MedTech, then do come and talk to us about the conference support, because it may be a case of you're going with your products, but actually you can attend some of that cross-boundary area, and that means that conference may fall within our remit to help support. And that's up to 50% of your actual costs. So that's really a useful one to consider. If we look at the next slide, that I've got the list of things, yes, what some of the areas are with this. The funding itself, as I say, it needs to be spent by June 2023. So unfortunately, if you've got something after that, you either need to pay for it up front, or you need to consider how you're going to pay for, say, some of it up to that point using our grants. It's for small and medium companies. Now, that's the European definition. So we know actually, for the majority of companies, you probably fall in that category, because it's up to sort of 43 million euros of turnover effectively. So if you come below that and you have less than 250 employees, then come and talk to us. That money may be accessible. You do need to have an address in the regions that still have money left. So that's Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Northamptonshire, which is where Silverstone sits, of course, all of Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes and Aylesbury Vale, which is in Buckinghamshire, so it does include Buckingham, and a little bit of Oxfordshire. We're quite happy to use virtual offices, or obviously with a lot of home working at the moment, you may find that you have senior members of your staff who actually are located and have been working from home in one of the regions that we support. So again, it's definitely worth a conversation to see if there is a way of helping you and getting this money out the door. We do not want to give it back to the EU. Innovation grants funding is for external activity. So unfortunately, it doesn't pay yourself and your company to pay your staff. It pays for anything that you may have to pull in, any supplier, any project manager, any of those kinds of areas to help deliver things. So again, it's worth conversation. Conference grants, anywhere in the world. So if you happen to have seen a really nice conference that you desperately would like to attend that's in Hawaii, then yeah, it's very possible, so long as it has a MedTech, health and wellbeing link for us to help you write the grants. And again, I know I keep saying this, but the funding does complete in June 2023, and that means you have to have spent it by then. So there are ways of staging payments, but everything must be spent and out of the business bank account by then. So please drop me a line, talk to me about anything that might interest you. And as a membership organisation, we'd love to talk to you about all the other things that we can offer to help you look at whether moving into or working with companies in the MedTech sector is something that would be really useful for you. So do come and chat to us. We have some fantastic members. We have some fantastic other contacts in our organisation, and there may be something there that we can help you with. So thank you very much. Here's my link. And please do drop me a line, have a chat, and we'll send you the slides afterwards. So that's the remaining grants with Medilink Midlands. I am now going to pass you across to my very experienced colleague, Caroline Sykes, who will be talking to you about some of the other funding out there, and also some of the issues remaining with what TR level you are and so on, and all of that area. So I will pass you across to Caroline. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Teresa. So my name's Caroline Sykes, and similar to Teresa, I'm Innovation Advisor within Medilink Midlands. A little bit about myself. So my technical background, I've got PhD in chemistry, but since doing my PhD, I left the lab and have then sort of been working at the interface between industry, academia and the NHS for the last 15 years. Initially, this was with about 13 years within the University of Nottingham, within their technology transfer office. So looking at supporting their researchers and their academics, developing new technologies within the healthcare side of things. I've then had 3 years of grant writing, so supporting companies apply for things like Innovate UK, NIHR and European funding. And then I've been at Medilink for almost a year now. So what's the aims and objectives of my presentation and sort of our conversation today? Really, it's to provide a whistle-stop tour through the different funding that's available. It's kind of to set the scene around the translational pathway for specifically within the healthcare side of things, and look at the funding that's available. And then secondary, looking at some tips on how to make your applications successful, hopefully. So I thought it would be just worth providing a bit of an overview around a typical development pathway for a healthcare technology. So we kind of start at TRL level 1 all the way up to TRL level 9. I'm sure you're all aware. And it kind of then goes from basic and applied research all the way through translational development, clinical evaluation, and adoption and diffusion. And it's important to kind of get a flavour of what TRL level you are, because when you're looking at appropriate funding and appropriate grants you can apply for, they often have a TRL level that they're focusing on, that you are eligible for applying. So it's kind of worth looking at this, a figure like this, working at your TRL level and then looking at relevant competitions. So if I move from a typical TRL level, then kind of link it across to some of the funds that are available for companies and for academics across this kind of translational pathway. So for basic research, which tends to be, we kind of tend to think it's been carried out a lot within academia, universities, hospitals, but some companies as well. There's the likes of the UK research, UKRI, so the likes of MRC, BBSRC, EPSRC. And these are only really available to universities, but there are charities that fund at this low level, this lower sort of early stage level. And some of those are very keen to engage with you, with companies, to look at how they can support the development of new technologies and new innovations associated with their particular charity focus. If we then look at sort of around the translational development and the clinical evaluation, which is where a lot of our companies are seeking funding for, there are UKRIs, so there's Innovate UK, who is specifically focused on supporting companies. And then there's also the NIHR as well, National Institute for Health Research, who again also look at supporting SMEs, all the way up to when we're looking at implementation and adoption. And there's a scheme called the SBRI Healthcare, which again is also very much open to companies. And I know that Esther will kind of look specifically at some of these funds and in a bit more detail. But what I want to focus on now is just get a bit of an overview around UKRI and firstly around the National Institute of Health Research, the NIHR. So the NIHR is really the research arm for the NHS, and they fund clinical trials, research for patient benefits, they fund a whole raft of kind of activities. But for a company developing a MedTech technology or MedTech device, the most relevant ones is the I4I funding streams, which is Invention for Innovation. And they have a number of schemes within their I4I kind of competitions. I4I Connect, which is just open to SMEs. And the idea of the I4I Connect is that you've got an innovation, you've got a technology, you've got some proof of concept, but you're not quite sure how to engage with the clinicians, to what that clinical trial will look like. You're not sure what your value proposition, your patient pathway is. So I4I Connect is a maximum of 150k, but it's 100% funded. And as I say, it's just open to SMEs. And they tend to run one competition a year. The idea of I4I Connect is that it's kind of a precursor to the I4I Product Development Award, PDA. And so the idea is that they support the companies to develop their technologies, to get an idea of what their clinical adoption pathway is, And then post Connect, it's kind of encourage you to apply for I4I Product Development Award, PDA. And one of the things, again, as an SME, you can apply for a PDA. However, you need to have collaboration between academia and or the NHS. So, and the reason for this is to really show that you're not just a company developing something in a silo. You actually know what the clinical problem is, and you're involving the clinicians and the end users. So the PDA, they have 2 to 3 competitions a year, and there's no funding or no ceiling of the amount of funding you can apply for. Typically, we will look at about £1 million, £2 million for 24, 36-month project. And again, typically this would then also include some technology development and the initial clinical trial stage as well. And for an SME, it's also 100% funded. So this is taken from an NIHR presentation, but they are very much encouraging SME engagement and SMEs to apply for their I4I funding. They're looking at this risk orientated program. They recognise that, you know, they're not at the later TRL stage of development, and therefore there is risk involved in the development. They are very much needing this collaboration between the NHS and the academia. And within the I4I scheme, there's a dedicated manager to provide support for SMEs, which again demonstrates their kind of focus and their real pull to get SMEs applying for this funding. Moving on to the Innovate UK, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. This is part of UKRI, and the Innovate is the one scheme, or is some competitions that SMEs and companies can apply for either on their own or in collaboration with academia and clinical partners. So they have themed calls, such as the biomedical catalyst, digital health, medical evaluation, and they also have open competitions which are open to any technologies at all. Each competition has its own rules and eligibility, and again I think Esther will come back to some of this later on. They tend to fund TRL level 3 to 7, so there needs to be some proof of concept, but you need to also have some key innovation activities to be undertaken as part of the competition, a part of your project. And they fund anywhere from 20k up to 40 million. Again, depends on sort of what scheme and what competition you're applying for. And SMEs tend to be about 70% funded. Varies on sort of your what activity you're doing, but tends to be 70% funded. So very quick, tour around NIHR, SM and Innovate UK funding, all of which are very much open and to SMEs, and the NIHR in particular are very much wanting to gain more applications from the SMEs. So imagine you've identified the right competition you want to apply for, and you open your application form, you look at the eligibility, you look at all the documents. So what do you need to consider when applying for grant funding? And this is the next 3 slides are from my experience and working with companies, things that the companies and the applicants need to consider when they're starting to write that application. And the first one is is align your answers to the questions. It comes back to when we were all doing our GCSEs, A levels, all of these exams at school. The answer, it's read the question and answer the question. And it may sound silly, but the amount of applications I've read from companies who have maybe answered 1 point but not answered all of them. So it's align your questions or align your answers to the questions. I think it's also important to not assume the reviewer's knowledge as well. So the reviewers there will be experts, but they may not be experts in your very niche field. So I've got 2 youngish children, and when they used to ask me what I did as a job, I would tell them I write stories to help companies get money. And it is, I think it's very important to think that your grant application is a story. You have to pitch it and say, this is the problem, this is the solution, and this is the benefit. And not assume that the reviewers understand all of your technical jargon. The other point is to ensure that the project fits the required scope. So I mentioned that the Innovate have different competitions. Each competition has a very specific scope. It might be that you have to apply for so much fund, you can only apply for so much funding, you have to have collaborators. And this again, it comes to the eligibility side of things as well. So it's important that you meet all of the scope and all of the eligibility, because the likes of Innovate and the likes of NIHR receive a lot of applications. And if they can throw your application out at an early stage before it's even gone to review because you don't fit the scope and you don't fit the eligibility, then they will, and that would be a real shame if you just need to shift your funds, the amount you're applying for slightly. Linked to these is building this required project team as well. So you won't just need your technical expertise. You will also need, if it's a medtech and healthcare, you'll need patient involvement as well. You might want to involve a charity who can provide access to some of these patients, PPI groups, but you also need clinical support as well. And it's kind of looking at who's are the key stakeholders in your technology, and are they involved in your project in some way. So the clinical representation, this not only shows that this shows a number of things. It shows that you've got that clinical buy-in. So you're not trying to push your technology out into the clinic. The clinicians are interested in being involved in this development because they see a real benefit of it. And they also know where your technology will fit into the current patient pathway. And they can provide key kind of links across to you as a company into that very complex, often NHS procurement side of things as well. So again, these ones, I guess, come back to a little bit about telling the story. So, if we're talking about developing something for cancer, the healthcare need and the healthcare requirements are very apparent to most people. If you're talking about a much more niche kind of application or technology, we still need to demonstrate what the healthcare need is. And why your technology is of value. So what's the health economics and the value proposition associated with your new innovation? You also need to show that there is a current unmet need. So why are you different to the current state of the art? And sometimes we have companies coming to us and saying, well, we're new, no one else is doing that. And that's not always the case. I think you need to think a little bit broader. It might be that in your very niche area, you are unique, but what are the clinicians using at the moment, or the patients using at the moment? What are you going to kind of disperse from the current clinical practice with your technology? For most grant applications, you have to demonstrate kind of what the market size is, and the number of patients involved. And if you can find this information and you reference it, it shows the reviewers that actually you know what you're talking about. You've done some background work. What I would say is try and avoid the big, massive global market size, and look at your niche market opportunity. And then the final one on this slide is really use the expertise and support that is available. So there are a number of organisations that offer support for free. So the likes of the NIHR RDSs, Research Design Services, they will look at how they can support you with your application, with your clinical trial designs. And the CRNs, again, they're all funded through the NIHR, and so a lot of these offer these supports for free of charge. It's just knowing who to talk to in each of these organisations. the academic health science networks, all about how we can support this collaboration and cross-fertilization between academic health science and companies, AHSNs, provide some of this support for free. And then the Medilink, you know, as a member organisation, we are also available to support some of these activities. Final slide around some of the tips and points to consider. You know, it's the reviewers, they're interested in the technology, but they also want to know, how are you going to make money? How are you going to have company growth? How are you going to encourage the UK to grow back, you know, from pre-COVID times? And so, as well as the technology, you need to make sure you've worked out, you've got a well thought out commercial plan. And I guess then linked to that is, you know, your project costs. Have you got, are you realistic around how long things will take and how much things will cost? And what from experience, what Innovate and NHR are like to see is that you've got a clear inflection point to the end of the project. So is the end of the project making you, you've got a device which is ready, which is regulatory approved to go into the clinic? Or will the end of the project be that you've done that initial clinical trial, which will then lead you to that larger randomized clinical trial or multi-center? So it's kind of, where will your project, how can you demonstrate value for money and for taxpayers' money from the NHR and the Innovate UK? And then a final point is to get a friendly reviewer. You know, someone from outside of the area who actually can read your application, they understand it, and it's made so everything's very clear around what you're doing. And this can be a paid for service, or it can simply be somebody from one of the organisations that I've mentioned previously who are willing to have a quick read through to make sure it all makes sense. So, as I said, a very quick whistle-stop tour through different funding and some tips. As Teresa, you know, here are my contact details, more than happy to have discussions with anybody and to look at how we can support through Medilink for some of these applications. I'm going to pass you on to Esther now from TBAT, who has many more years experience of grant writing than I have, and I think hopefully provide you with some additional information around grant funding as well. So Esther, if I stop sharing, hopefully you're...
Thanks, Caroline. Great, so thanks. So I'm Esther from TBAT Innovation, and we're an independency consultancy, and we've been helping people access innovation funding for around about 20 years now. And we're in here today because we're patrons of Medilink, and we're also members of the Silverstone Technology Cluster. So, you know, TBAT have got a team of highly experienced bid writers, and they're all kind of PhD level. They've been working in industry, and now they've moved over, making that kind of jump to writing applications, and they're really successful. You know, we have around about an 80% success across the board when it comes to bid writing. And TBAT have got a slightly different approach, I think, when we're trying to help companies. So it's very much with us around, you know, how do we take people on that innovation journey from that early kind of idea right the way through to maybe you're looking for seed investment. And we've got lots of different services that we can offer people. And really, so we've got things like R&D tax credits and other tax incentives there that, you know, you really need to be making sure that when you are applying for grant funding, you know, don't overlook those, because it's another way that you can get a bit more money back into doing some more R&D. But what we're really going to be talking about today is the grant funding that we can help with. And there's lots of different grant funding out there. And obviously, Caroline's just been talking around, you know, all of the MedTech life science funding. There's funding available from all sorts of sources, right the way down from your LEP all the way up to UK government, where they're trying to kind of keep that innovation engine going and making sure they're pumping lots of money into UK businesses. So for today, we're going to be talking about, you know, R&D funding. Next slide, please. And this might seem like a really strange question, but something I get asked all the time is, why should I bother with grant funding? Because everyone's heard that horror story where someone will say to you, oh, I spent 5 weeks writing an application and then it just didn't even get marked. But actually, what we need to start thinking about is, you know, did you read the application beforehand, or did you read the scope and the criteria? Did you fit that? Because quite often people don't look at all of the fine print, and they didn't even fit the application in the first place. So it's, you know, that they tell everyone their horror stories, but, you know, grant funding is a great thing. If you've got time to be able to prepare and plan and know when that finance is coming in, you know, it's free money. And I always say to people, you know, where are you going to get free money from normally in this day and age? So it's a really good way to get cash into the business. Now, when you are filling out your grant application, you're doing your due diligence. So you're getting all those kind of ducks in a row. You've got a good, strong financial plan. You understand the market. You've got a team of experts that are working with you. You know you're going to be able to bring a project into a specific price plan because you've done all those financials. You had a look, seen how much you're going to need for that project. And it's a really good time then to go out to your investors and say, well, we've been, you know, rubber stamped by the government. How would you like to invest in us at the same time? So even if you've pulled all that information together and you weren't successful with your grant funding, you've got that you can then take out to your investors as well. So it's a really good time to put lots of effort into it and make sure that you've pulled all that information together and you've done your due diligence. And again, you might be looking at competitions where you're a really small part of a huge project. So you can go out and say, look, we've developed this piece of niche technology and we know we can do X if we can collaborate with you. So it's a really good time to go out and have those conversations, make sure that you have them early, because you don't want to be leaving it to the last minute when you've got 4 weeks to a grant deadline and you're still trying to find those partners. So early on, have some really good conversations, go out, don't be afraid to speak to people. And if you're not sure how to make those connections, you've got the knowledge transfer network are really good and they can help you go out and find the right people to speak to. And ultimately, you know, it's going to reduce the risk of you putting your own cash into this business. And R&D is always going to be risky. So if you can get free cash from the government, then it's always a really good time to kind of push forward and make sure that you are applying for grant funding. And there is so much funding available out there. Next slide, please. So whereas Caroline's just kind of really focused in on those kind of life sciences, you know, the broader funding landscape is huge. So Caroline mentioned then the NIHR, the SBRI and Innovate UK, where you've got things like the biomedical catalyst, but the wider funding landscape, you know, there's something there to fit most companies, whether you're looking to go down that like deep decarbonisation route towards the kind of net zero solutions. We've got lots of competitions coming out of from BAYS. You might be there thinking, actually, we've got the latest, you know, looking at different fuels for aerospace. You might have like a looking at liquid hydrogen, maybe going into aerospace, or the latest electric vehicles. So you've got things like the Advanced Propulsion Centre. There's huge amounts of funding coming through for sustainable vehicles. And we've seen projects that we've personally worked on there, anything from 4 million up to 40 million pounds. And likewise, there's still a lot of funding coming from Europe. It's a bit political at the moment. We're not quite sure what's going to happen, but currently, you know, we still are able to apply into the Eureka Stars, to the Horizon Europe, for instance, as well. And don't forget things like the Space Agency. So there's lots of funding coming through ESA, and you might not necessarily be developing the next rocket, but if you've got a technology that's using space technology, then you're able to apply for some of those. And then I've always got I always call it the weird and wacky funding through DASA and the Security Accelerator. I've seen strange competitions come through there where people have got dissolvable drones or dolphin sonar or developed a sensor that can pretty much detect anything. So if you've got an idea that's a bit weird, a bit wacky, or might even win us a war, huge amounts of funding coming through those guys. So as I say, grant funding landscape is huge. What I've tried to do in the next slide is to identify some that would fit within, you know, the companies across Silverstone Technology Cluster. By no means is this an exhaustive list of what's out there. If you go to UKRI, I think there's around about 14 pages of different grants available. But these ones are really popular grants that we get asked about all the time. And Caroline touched on some of these earlier, but I'll go a little bit more in detail and tell you a bit more about them. So the SMART grant's probably the one that everybody talks about. It's an open call for innovation. It's been running in its current form for a couple of years now, and it tends to be run once a quarter. So the round now is due to close around the end of October, and we anticipate another one will launch with an end date in January. The thing about the SMART grants is there's a lot of competition. Because it's open, you could be up against anyone, and they are looking for game-changing, you know, world-leading ideas. It can't just be something that's new or novel, you know, within a particular sector. It's got to be a genuinely new idea that you can really rapidly commercialize and take that to market. They've got kind of split down. So if you are a single company going into this, you can apply for up to £500,000, and you can have a project that can run from anything from 6 months to 18 months. But if you're thinking, actually, our project needs to be bigger, we need to run it over a longer space of time, that's not a problem, but you will need to collaborate with another company. And then that's going to allow you to take that up to £2 million, and your project can last up to 36 months. But it's got to be, as I say, new, novel and disruptive. You can't just be developing something that's new within a particular sector. We've got the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, and they've just launched a new, their phase 2, which is their autumn fund. And this one's to support industrial sites with real high energy use and to help them to transition to that like low carbon future. The fund really is there to target existing industrial processes and to help companies that are trying to cut their energy bills by investing in more efficient technologies, and to reduce reduce emissions by bringing down the costs and the associated risks with investing in real deep decarbonisation technology. So make sure that fund is kind of ongoing. Make sure you have a look at the website, and you can find out about future funds as well coming up within there. Farming Innovation is a program that's been running now for a little while, and again they've got lots of planned competitions. There's one that's open right now, and it's called Small Scale R&D Partnership Projects, but it's by no means small. This is an £11 million fund, and they're funding projects from £1 million up to £3 million. And the aim of this competition is to fund industrial research and studies into developing new solutions that are going to address those kind of like issues that farmers are having, on the farm and then immediately post farm gate, as they say. But if you've got a solution within farming and you're looking to improve productivity, sustainability, the environmental impact, and again, leading towards that net zero solution, you can cover any types of farming from livestock, plants, novel food production, and the bioeconomy of farming. So it's quite broad, and they've got lots more competitions coming. So make sure, again, you have a little look at their website and sign up to get their newsletters. The Driving the Electric Revolution, again, been around for a little while. Huge fund, £80 million in total. There's the current, what they have out now is their PEMD scale up, which is the strand 1. And this is all around adopting manufacturing best practices. So this current round has got around £50,000 up to £400,000. And the whole idea behind Driving the Electric Revolution, it's all about enabling electrification across multiple sectors. So great for Silverstone technology clusters, because we've got people within today that kind of come from every sector. So it's aiming to ensure that the UK leads the way really in developing and manufacturing of that power electronics, machines and drives. And they'll fund projects that are really there to help with those kind of like future improvements of supply chain, capability, productivity and capacity. And also, again, it's that supporting that push towards the net zero carbon emissions. One that Caroline touched on a little bit earlier was the I4I product development. The next competition is launching on the 20th of October. There will be a briefing event, which if you're interested, I would recommend anybody go along, sign up and listen to. Hasn't been announced yet, so keep an eye on the website. But the product development awards, kind of, as Caroline was saying, is really there to support that kind of like transitional research and development of medical devices. They'll fund in vitro diagnostics, artificial intelligence technologies, high impact focused digital health technologies, just to name a few. But they've all got to have that ultimate kind of NHS use case. The one thing as well to note is that they are looking to fund projects that have got at least a minimum of proof of concept, and again they're looking at clear pathways towards commercialization. And one thing to note on this one is that if you're going to go into as a lead, you need to be based in England. But again, I'd recommend you sign up, get newsletters so you can find out about all of this information. And the last one that I've highlighted is the Future Plastic Packaging Solutions. Again, huge fund, £2.5 million. It's there to really it aims to establish the UK again as a leading innovator in that smart and sustainable plastic packaging for the consumer products. And it's got some real clear goals. Number one, it wants to deliver a cleaner growth across the supply chain. So you find a lot of these kind of net zero pathway ones. It's around supply chain as well as developing a new product. You know, they really need to dramatically reduce the plastic waste that's going into the environment by 2025. So if you've got a project that's going to deliver more of a circular kind of plastic packaging value chain and really going to have some environmental impacts that are going to reduce carbon emissions, improve those recyclability costs and the amount that's going to landfill, then you can apply for anything from between £30,000 up to £250,000 in funding. So you can see, just from a real small kind of overview there of 6-7 competitions, there's about £400 million available. So huge amounts of funds. Make sure you sign up to the individual, if you're interested in those, sign up to the website, you know, come and have a chat with us. We can always tell you a bit more about them. So if you are thinking about applying, there's a few things that you need to consider when you are applying into them. And as I said at the beginning, everyone's heard those horror stories where people didn't get their application marked or they scored really badly. It's about making sure you fit the eligibility to all the different criteria that start coming up within these competitions. So within the business criteria, really simple one, you know, are you a registered UK business? If not, register on Companies House and then you'll be okay to apply. So as long as at the point when you send in your application, you're a registered UK company, you're all good. It's really important to look at what size company you are. And this isn't to do with, you know, whether you can apply or not, because you can apply at any size, but it's going to have an impact on, you know, the amount of funding that you're going to be eligible for. So there's different levels depending on the size of the company. And also, have you identified the industry or the target market? Because you're always going to have more success if you go into a themed call. You know, the open calls for innovation are great, but as I said earlier, they're really highly competitive. So if you can make sure that you're going to fit within a themed competition, it's much better for you. And have you applied for grant funding before? Again, doesn't affect, you can, if you've applied for a grant in the past, you can still apply again, but there's a couple of rules which people ask me all the time. Can you apply for 2 grants at once? You can, as long as they're separate projects. You can't double dip, so you can't have a BMC and a SMART for exactly the same project. You can only be funded during one of them. And also, you know, if you've applied into an application before and it's been unsuccessful, you're able to apply once more. But after the second time, if you're unsuccessful, you need to significantly change that project before you're allowed to go in and do it again. But I mean, the good thing is if you have been unsuccessful, you're going to get lots of really good feedback. It's going to allow you to go away and change that application and have another shot at it. Next slide, please. So when you start looking at financial eligibility, the most important thing really to kind of be thinking about early on is, do you have the funds really to apply for this grant? Because a lot of the grants, you know, there are some out there that are 100% funded, but lots of them from Innovate UK and the other funding organisations are likely to be matched funds. So as an SME, if you're going into a competition, the likelihood is you're going to get 70%, as Caroline said earlier. You can't then offer your time for free. You have to have cash in the bank. And what that means is when you kick off your project, you've got to have 4 months worth of costs in the bank in order to carry out that project, because everything's paid retrospectively. You'll be able to carry out your first 3 months worth of work. At the end of month 3, you'll submit your invoice and you'll get paid 30 days later. So make sure that you know that by the time you kick off your project, that you're going to have that cash available to make sure that you can carry it out. You know, make sure you look at your project costs. You know how much things cost. Quite often we've spoken to people who say, oh, we didn't really get good, you know, costings, and we just kind of estimated it and put our fees in, and then they don't know why they weren't successful when people tell them they didn't offer good value for money. You know, or we get asked, how much should I apply for? And the answer is, how much do you need? And can you justify why you need that money? So make sure you understand, you know, how much things cost and what you need to put in there and what costs are eligible. So again, dig a little bit deeper, look at the kind of the material cost, the overheads and everything that you can put into that grant. So you're claiming everything possible, but not going into things that aren't going to be qualified. Otherwise, again, you'll just get your application rejected. Next one, please. So again, looking at the technical element, one question that I get asked, you know, what I ask people all the time is, you know, is there anybody else out there doing anything similar to you. And quite often we get the, no, I don't think so. And a quick Google search will instantly reveal that there are other companies doing something similar, or, you know, they've got something really close to market. So you need to have a little look and make sure you know exactly, you know, the detailed competitor analysis, you know what's going on. And if there is something out there that's similar to what you're doing, you need to be able to justify what you're doing is, you know, taking it one step on, and why that, you know, current state of the art needs improving. So you just need to make sure that you've got, you know, you've got the freedom to operate, you've looked at your IP, you know who your competitors are, and that's all within your application. Have a little look at the level of innovation as well, because again, different levels of innovation are going to allow you to claim different amounts of money. If, for instance, you're applying into a competition for feasibility studies, you're at industrial research stage, chances are you're going to get around 70%. But if you've gone past that and you're at that experimental development stage, it's going to drop down closer to about 45% if you are, you know, a small, medium client. So next question, next one, please. This name, you know, have you looked at the funding landscape? Because what we'd always say to people is, let's try and find a fund that's going to fit the project that you're doing. Quite often you get, you know, startups desperate to get hold of some cash. So the first thing they do is they have a little look around and think, oh, there's a nice fund, it's worth £500,000. How do we make our project fit that? Which is completely the wrong way round, because if you start shoehorning your project into a fund just to chase after that cash, the chances are it's going to take you off into a tangent that you didn't really want to go into, or it's not going to quite fit the scope, the criteria, and you're going to get marked down. So make sure you identify either a themed call that's going to fit, or you look at the open calls. And again, as I said earlier, it may well be that you need to take your project on, you know, a longer amount of time, or you're looking for more money, in which case you're going to need to start looking for partners, for consortiums. And when you are looking for these, make sure you've got them, you know, early on, you've got those agreements in place, so that you're not scrabbling around at the last minute trying to think, oh, somebody's dropped out, how are we going to get somebody else in? Because you have such a short space of time to write these applications, you know, it could really scupper your chances of being successful. So if you are having those kind of, you need a partner or consortium, make sure that you get them in really early on. And again, just really with the project eligibility, we would say, make sure you've read the scope, ask questions, go to Innovate Edge, go to any of the other membership organizations, you know, come and have a chat with us. It's completely free of charge. You can pick the brains of our bid writers, and they'll always sit with most companies and just give them some idea. So if you've got questions, ask them before you start writing it, and make sure that you are eligible before you've spent 4 weeks really writing your application. And so some top tips really, if you are looking to go into grant funding, this might sound like a really simple one, and Caroline touched on this earlier, answer all the questions and all the bullet points. So in a traditional Innovate UK application, you've got 10 questions. Those 10 questions are all weighted equally. So every question is equal. Don't spend, you know, all your time looking at the technical kind of side of it and thinking, I'll worry about my team, I'll worry about the risk assessments later, because you might write the perfect answer for the first 7 questions. But if you don't answer each question equally, chances are you're not going to be successful. So answer all the questions, make sure that you don't miss any out, and answer them to the best of your ability. Don't use acronyms, technical kind of jargon, because as Caroline mentioned, you're going to have a competent person reading this application, but they might not understand your novel new technology. So make sure, you know, if you did take it to anybody else, they could read through it, even in layman's terms, you know, they'd be able to pick up what you're doing, and make sure that it's not beyond the realms of anybody outside your organization. Otherwise, the assessors are just going to mark it down because they didn't understand what you were doing. When you are writing that application, remember that use the formatting options that are there. It's like anything. If somebody's just sent you a jumbled up bunch of words, it's going to be difficult to read. So make sure you've formatted it, put it into a really good format that's going to make it easy to read, to follow. You want to give yourself as much chance as possible. And this is probably the biggest, you know, thing I would say to people is leave plenty of time. Now, just last week, I was chatting to one of my clients, and they said, we left our application with our CEO to submit. And he thought it'd be a really good idea before he submitted it, he would have a quick read through it and make sure that there was nothing there, glaringly obvious, that he thought should change. So he's reading through it, got a phone call, got called into a meeting, come out 2 hours later and realized he'd missed the deadline. So he'd had one of his employees working on that for 4 weeks and he missed the deadline. So leave plenty of time for writing it. Make sure you review it, then you review it again, then give it to somebody else to review, because you don't want to submit something with a really small issue that's going to make the difference between you being funded and not, and leave plenty of time for uploading it. Try and do it the day before, because we've heard the horror stories where everyone tries to upload a smart grant at 10:59 on the day of the deadline, and then the servers crash. So give yourself plenty of time and go and speak to experts. So they will always be there to help you. So that was kind of the slightly broader landscape that's out there. We're more than happy to have any conversations, any one-to-ones. If you've got any more questions, then please do come and have a chat with me. I'm going to hand back over now to Teresa.
Hello. Well, we're on to the question and answer. Let me start again here. Thank you very much for our presenters. That's Esther and Caroline. That was a really, really good run through of all the funding landscape. And I've listened to, both TBAT and Caroline and others before, but I'm still sitting there thinking, good point. I need to really focus on that. So thank you very much for the input. I'm sure there is going to be a lot of interest here. And I believe we're on to questions now.
Yes, we are. We do have a couple of questions that we wanted to raise with you. So with match funds, do you need cash in the bank, or can we offer it, or can we offer our time for free?
No, when it comes to match funding, you need to have cash in the bank. We understand that, it's normally the early kind of companies that are looking for, can we offer our time in kind? And the answer to that is unfortunately no. You need to make sure that you've planned for it and that you've got a means, not necessarily when you submit your application, but you can say, by the time we start our project, we will have X funds in the bank ready to kick off.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question we have got is, if collaboration and clinical involvement is needed for grant-funded projects, how would you advise these connections are made?
Yeah, I can answer this one. I guess it's looking at which support organisations are out there that can help you identify the key sort of clinical advisors or key clinical collaborators. So I think, as I mentioned, like the likes of the the NIH RDSs, who are going to become RSSs, I don't know what it stands for. But the research design services, that they're linked to all of the different university hospitals across England, and they'll be able to help you. The AHSNs, the Academic Health Science Networks, again, they're regionally based, but you don't have to contact the AHSN that you're geographically located in. So use the AHSNs and then the likes of Medilink as well. We can come and we can then look at our network, and if there's anybody within our network that's sort of working in that area as well of interest, then that's what we can do as within Medilink as well.
That's great.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
I would support that definitely, because Medilink has a lot of contacts with AHSNs, hospitals and universities, and for very early stage companies, as Caroline and Esther will support, that is the problem, is getting that group together, getting those collaborators together, and it's not a quick process. So we have some fantastic companies with lots and lots of wonderful innovation, but they do, particularly in the medical arena, although there are obviously regulations in other areas as well, but they need to be aware that however groundbreaking their innovation may turn out to be, they're looking at quite a long period of time to get those collaborators together, to get that interest, to get it in front of all the right people, to make sure that their application, when they make one, is successful. So having all those conversations, they need to allow themselves, really, I'm talking a year or 2 years here, to go through the whole process of something that is really new to the market. So TBAT, Medilink, we're good places to come and talk, to discuss, what do we do next with something really new.
Thank you very much. We've got another question. Feedback seems to often be lacking. What can we do about that?
So I I agree with your comment that the feedback, unfortunately, from the NIHR in particular is very lacking, which is frustrating. And that does get fed back into the NIHR. So I've been on sort of SME working groups with the NIHR and said, you know, people spend a long time writing these and we get 2 like bullet point feedback. So they're aware of that, but I'm not sure what's going to change. Innovate UK, however, I would say is the opposite. Esther, you've more experienced more recently on these, but
yeah, and we do see some really good feedback through Innovate UK. So that's the great thing, is if you are unsuccessful, you know, you're going to find out, you know, what each of those examiners were thinking about your project. So there's plenty coming through there. I think you just say it's just unfortunately sometimes with the NIHR it doesn't always follow suit.
no.
Great, thank you. We've got a request from one of our listeners today. We design and develop power supplies for aerospace and automotive sectors. Can we get in touch with you to discuss 2 of our products, which are TR5, in order to get funding, as these can be adapted to MedTech and all other sectors? So I would imagine the answer is yes.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we would have anybody that's interested. We'll always set up a one-to-one. We can have a chat, find out, you know, what the project is, and then we can look at the best ways to move forward. What's the best grant out there for you, and give you some advice on what you need to be doing. Not necessarily as well what's there now, but we can tell you what's likely to come up in the next 12 months based on what we've seen before. So more than happy if we can send a link out afterwards, you can book directly with us.
Brilliant. Yes, absolutely. And that's just a reminder to everyone that following today's webinar, we will send the details from today's presentation, and we will definitely make the introduction so you can get in touch with our presenters. I think we've got time for one last question. I have heard that securing funding through Innovate UK is very hard. Do you know the typical success rates?
So if you were to kind of go across the board, say for something like a SMART grant, for instance, sometimes the success rate can be, you know, around 5%. But actually, when you start looking at the people who didn't read the applications properly, so they didn't fit the scope, or they've, as a single entity, they've applied for too much money, or the project's too long, and then you look at the people who just didn't put enough effort into those applications, you know, the chances are that actually it's going to take that up to much closer to about 60% if you've written a really good, robust application. Now, when you use like somebody like TBAT, it takes it dramatically higher, and we've got a success rate of around about 76% into a SMART, and around 80% across the board. So it's about not necessarily looking at the success rate as now, because so many people apply in that shouldn't have done, or just didn't put in the right amount of effort into their application. So it's more about, don't look at the success rate, think about how you're going to write a really good, strong, robust application that's going to answer all of those questions, and making sure that you can say, look, you know, we're offering value for money. We've got a really good team. We know we've got a great project that's solving real world life issues, and that we can commercialize it. So if you can answer all those questions, then don't necessarily look at what other people are doing. Just look forward and think, actually, we're going to have a go, and the chances are that you're going to be successful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think that is all we have time for today. If you've got any further questions, as I said, we'll share the details and you can continue the conversation with our presenters today. So thank you very much to all of our presenters. It's been a very insightful presentation, and I'm sure the attendees have gained some really useful knowledge. I also want to thank all of you for joining us today. Before you log off, would you please take a moment to just complete our poll, as your feedback is really important for us, and we always look for ways to improve. So share your thoughts and opinions. Finally, thank you very much for your time. If you want to find out about some of our upcoming webinars, please visit our website, and have a lovely rest of your day.